All right.
Welcome back to another episode of the TitleTown Rundown here on Boston Sports Zone. Joey Matroni once again with you alongside Kyler Quelch. We are going to get it started with another Boston-wide episode. We'll begin on the Red Sox side of things. We got once again two series to talk about. One, a series loss to the Washington Nationals, which had a lot more than just the baseball go on within that. We got a little bit of a taste of it due to some breaking news from the last Celtics episode. But we'll get into that series along with the most recent series, which was another series sweep. Surprising to see the Red Sox get on the right end of a sweep because it seems like when they've had success, they can't get over the hump to get that sweep, but they get the recent sweep against the Yankees, and then follow that up just a couple series later with a sweep over the Los Angeles Angels, and they have a well-deserved day off heading into their next series against the Chicago White Sox. Um, Kyler, the Red Sox have now won 8 of their last 10 games, and they're finally building some momentum for a first time this year. It feels like.
Yeah, Joey, this is the confusing thing about the Red Sox. They really did play like the worst team in the MLB the first 2 months of the season. And then like the third month, or 2.5 months in, they finally started to you started to see flashes, but it wasn't consistent. Then by the end of June, and now we're in the early July, they're starting to really play good baseball. And I got to give them credit where credit's due because they have two sweeps now, and they've won 8 of their last 10, as you mentioned. I really do like that for Red Sox fans. One thing that really kind of makes me wonder about this whole thing is just how committed are the Red Sox to a certain position, whether it's buying or selling. Really, that's all I care about at this point, if I'm being honest, because I want to know, are you going to add to the team, or am I going to have to wait until 2028 for baseball potentially for a championship? Uh, we can have that conversation at a different date, obviously, but one way that I really look at this is kind of through the American League wild card. This is the worst I've ever seen the American League. I actually might want to watch the PGA Tour because of how bad the Red Sox had been, and not even just the Red Sox, but the American League. They are 8 games. They're back up to 8 games below 500. Woohoo! But but you look at the American League, and I only see um, teams that are below 500 who are in it. They're only 4 games out of the wild card, and when you're 5 games or less out by the All Star break in any playoff position, you tend to go for it. I saw an article by Patrick McAvoy, and he was talking about how they should probably sell, which I can understand why, right? They've had a lot of injuries with the Suarez injury, the early injury, the Roman Anthony, Crochet, Meyer, laundry list. But but I think it's tough because they're finally starting to find their groove. You see Contreras really coming into his own, even though him and Chapman and Gray have arguably carried the team the whole year, with the exception of the 3 outings that weren't great for Chapman. And it's kind of one of those situations where I'm like, well, they're in it. You know what I mean? Do I really want to waste this season? Because Sonny Gray's been amazing. And do I really want to waste the season, for guys like Tolley and Early who've played well? So, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Peyton Tolley specifically struggle in that National Series, which is going to happen every once in a while with a young pitcher. There have been ups and downs for both him and Early. But just generally looking at how the rest of this first half is going to end, as we both mentioned, they're 8-2 in their last 10 games, and they've got 6 games to go before the break. 3 against the Chicago White Sox, who have been a surprise in the American League, and then in almost an equivalent in the National League to the Red Sox and the New York Mets, who had a lot bigger expectations for what their season has turned out to be. But this is wishful thinking, I'm sure. But if the Red Sox were to win all 6 of those games, or be 5-1 even, they'd be at 5-1. They'd be at 3 games below 500, leading into the All-Star break, and with all 6, they'd be 46-48, 2 games under 500, heading into that All-Star break. And that is right to your point, Kyler, is that they're very much in it at that point. So the decision does become even more difficult in my eyes, especially looking at some of the veteran guys that you've had. Willson Contreras homered twice in the last 2 games in the series against the Angels, one of which gave the Red Sox the lead, which they did not give back in the finale against the Angels, and that was his 20th homer of the year, after there being a lot of discussion at the start of the season where the Red Sox lacked power, and it didn't seem like anyone was really going to go 20-plus homers. Willson Contreras has done it in the first half. So I would love to keep him at this point, and then there's going to be even more of a discussion about Chapman and Gray, and overall, this Chapman's trade value has been fluctuating a lot recently, especially with some of the down outings that you've mentioned. And then Sonny Gray is 10-1, arguably the biggest All-Star snub alongside Willson Contreras, which we can break down a little bit even more if we would like. But Sonny Gray is going to become an even more interesting conversation, especially after Ranger Suárez left after 2 2/3 innings last night with a left adductor strain, which you briefly mentioned, Kyler. If they're going to be without Ranger Suárez, and he wasn't sure whether or not after the game last night whether this injury was going to lead to an IL stint. But if he's out for a certain number of, if he does hit the IL, he's definitely out until after the All-Star break, and maybe even a couple of games past the All-Star break. So by the time the trade deadline comes around, if you still don't have him, if this is an extended injury, then losing Sonny Gray would be that much more of a hit to the Red Sox pitching staff, assuming that Garrett Crochet isn't anywhere close to coming back at this point.
Yeah, and that's why I lean closer to selling, because I feel like they've had everything that can go wrong, and it doesn't feel like their year. But do I really want to waste what they have done? You know what I mean? Like, do I really want to throw the towel in when they're starting to actually play well? Like, I don't know how that would really look for the organization either. But I'm gonna cross sports, and I know you're not huge on that, but you look at like Brad Stevens with the Celtics versus Craig Breslow situation. I have much more faith that Brad Stevens is going to figure out whatever he's got to figure out, because he's 2-time executive of the year. They know what direction they're going in like kind of retooling to contending. Um, and with the Red Sox, you don't know what direction they're going in. 1 minute they're saying that they're buying, and then the next they say they're selling, and then now with the McAvoy article, it sounds like Craig Breslow's all in on getting a batter now, a right-handed bat. So, like, or that he's considering it. So, with it changing every 5 minutes, it feels like we have a little bit of attention deficit where we don't know what direction we're going into. And and I'm okay with that, but you have to kind of figure out where you can put your focus and what are you willing to give up? What are you not willing to give up? What do you want to trade for the future? Do you want to set this team up for next year? I'm not sure I want to set the team up for next year when I'm not even sure if there is going to be a next year. So, like, that's where I kind of lie too, where it's like, okay, I think you could beat out a team like Toronto and Baltimore because you're heating up. You have that momentum going. And I think that if you really were to go all in, the whole morale of the organization would change. I already think it is starting to change because ownership isn't happy because there's more and more empty seats. So I feel like it's one of those situations where you're kind of caught in the middle. And I said in the agenda outline that I was caught between a rock and a hard place, as they say, and with this whole thing. But they're also one of three teams with a positive run differential, and I know that doesn't always matter and mean that you're a good team because Detroit is another one of those teams, and the other team that has a positive differential in terms of runs scored versus runs against is the New York Yankees, who you just swept. So in that sense, I'm like, okay, that means your pitching staff has done very well, and if you added a batter or two, you might go on a run, and you already are starting to see that hot streak. And with how weak the competition is, it's easy to get on those. Hey, we've won 25 out of 30 games, like or 15 out of 20
That
or
would
whatever it
that'd
is.
be unbelievable. 25 out of 30 would be
Okay,
unbelievable.
I made it a little
They,
bit drastic.
they'd be right back in it at that point. But I mean, hey, if it comes along, you're gonna take it, obviously. But I think that you're right, and you even take a look at the way that the AL East is currently playing out. You're only a full game out of being in third place in the American League East, where the Baltimore Orioles currently stand, because a lot of the season, rather most of the season, I should say, has been the Yankees and Rays up at the top of the division, and even the Rays have now opened up a 4-game lead at the top of the American League East. And as you mentioned earlier, Kyler, only 4 games out of a postseason spot in the wild card, so there's still very much a chance that this Boston team can go on a run. But then you have to take a look, like you said, at what you're willing to get rid of. Obviously, there's a number of prospects that there's still a positive outlook on for the Red Sox, whether that be on the pitching side, Anthony Iverson or Ianson, I should say, and then Franklin Arias, the shortstop for the Portland Sea Dogs currently. Now, those guys could be big parts of your future, but if you wanted to make a big splash move, those guys might be somewhere you look to make that big acquisition. You might have to um, part ways with them, or you want them to be part of your future, and then it becomes a situation of when they get to the major league level, what is their expectation? What is the expectation versus what is their reality? Because you look at someone like Marcelo Meyer, who defensively has been fantastic ever since he got up to the major league level, but his bat has left something to be desired. So looking to bolster the roster, you're looking for guys that are proven and have done well at the major league level, and it's even a better position if they've done well in the postseason because you're looking to get into the postseason.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on to what you were saying, Joey, like honestly, I have no faith in the Red Sox ability to develop people right now. I'd trade the farm. I would be Dave Dombrowski. Let's go. Like, we're going to win this year because, like I said, I don't think we're going to win next year, and the fan base is losing hope. So if I was ownership, I would say, you know what? I would either say sell the whole thing and let's restart in 2 years or a year and a half or however long it's going to take. Because I don't think there is really going to be a lot of baseball next year. If there is, it'll be like COVID, where some weird team gets hot and wins it. But I feel like it's like kind of one of those times where it's like I don't know what next year is going to bring. If I'm ownership, sure, I know that the right move is to sell if I think that it puts me in a good position for next year. But I'm not sure if there's going to be a next year, and that's also why I would consider why not unload a couple of prospects when you haven't proven that you can develop players. And Brian Bayo has had his whole mental capacity gone. I don't know what where the performance has gone. That first inning, those first inning yips or whatever they are. I have no idea. That's totally an organizational thing, in my opinion, because how can so many guys with so much talent start off so bad and then just start to heat up once they find a groove? Like, that just indicates that you have an organizational problem and not a talent problem. And I've said that all along, Joey. And and I think the American League is so bad that I think by the trade deadline, they could very much have a wild card spot because of how bad it's been. Like I said, there's only 3 teams with a positive differential, and one of those teams obviously is not in the play, or both 2 of those teams aren't in the playoff picture right now. One of them is the Yankees, who you've swept. So, and the way that I look at this too, I look at the National League, right, and I look at a team like the Cubs. Cubs are in right now at one of the top 3 teams in there. You have the Phillies, you have the Cardinals, Marlins are right on the outside looking in, and so on the Pirates and the Nationals. And they're all teams that have a good differential. But and you'll have some, you know, exemptions or whatever to the rule. But that just shows me, you can even look at the wins. Like the Cubs are at, all right, 50 wins. All right, they're at 50 wins, and the Yankees are at 49. But you have like the Phillies, and yeah, the Phillies are at 50 as well. St. Louis is at 47, and Miami's at 49. So like, you have teams that are right around 50 wins in the wild card, and yet here you are at
40
38.
wins.
Or yeah, you're at 40. Sorry, forgot a couple wins there. But yeah, you're right around 40 wins, and you're just out of it. So that just shows how much of a difference there is between the National League and the American League this year. I was just going over some statistics just to kind of like show that. But Boston, to me, is led by the fire and the spirit of Willson Contreras. And one thing I really wanted to talk about, Joey, was that suspension and some of the things that kind of led to it. And, it is my opinion that the league has completely changed their tolerance for a little arguing or a little bit of excitement, if you will, like benches clearing, like, you know, okay, I'm going to be a bad example and say I miss the days of Veritek and A-Rod are going at it, Joe Buck calling that, and Don Zimmer gets thrown to the ground by Pedro, and, rivalry, a little bit of a rivalry spar there, but, and violence isn't okay, but I do think that, you're missing a little bit of that spark, and Contreras, he brings it with his bat, he brings it with his attitude. He went after, Cade Cavalli, but Cavalli also said, "Sit down, boy," and he kind of went after him there. But then the game before that, he just tapped his helmet and he got ejected. Like, to me, you can't even have a conversation or look at the umpires without getting ejected. So, like, how are you supposed to ask for clarification anymore if you're just going to get ejected because of the instant replay? I know that they changed this rule when instant replay came in, but how is that? But that changes the dynamic. You can't even look, the wrong way anymore. in my opinion. But the flip side of it is you're the captain of the ship, Willson, and you got to be out there. You can't be missing 7 games. So if the league's going to call it that way, you got to be a leader. You got to say, listen, I'm not going to get into it with Cavalli. Maybe I'll say something and get like a game or two, but maybe I won't throw my helmet. Maybe I won't get into that fight. Although, if you're already gonna do it, do it. You know what I mean? Like if you're gonna go all in, you better do something worse. Like it just seems like to me you're putting yourself in a worse situation by engaging in that sort of behavior. And I think I'm conflicted because there's part of me that's like go out there and defend. But when you're not out there for 7 games and your team's already hot and you're hitting a home run every other day, or in some cases back-to-back days, who's going to pick up the slack for you, Willson? Like, use that energy to pump up the guys. You know what I mean? Go, let's go, let's go. Like motivate them, and maybe mentor them, and not necessarily use it on negative behaviors that are going to get you 7 to 20 games because of how the league operates now. And I don't necessarily agree with it, but I'm just saying that's how the league's going to operate. You might as well just be a better leader when you're obviously the guy that they've kind of delegated to be in that role.
Yeah, I think that you're right in the fact that he is the leader of this team. We even saw it when he got ejected in the first game against Washington in the series. He was trying to fire up the guys before he went down the tunnel, and unfortunately, it didn't end up leading to a win because Cavalli, and that can be part of a discussion. He stayed in the game and continued dominating on the mound like he had been. And then on the actual suspension itself, the league will look at the appeals, and we should have either a decision by Monday night as of this recording or sometime early Tuesday morning, which will be on the forefront of the Red Sox news at the start of this week, as they will get started with the White Sox series on Tuesday night at 7:40. But I think that you're right, kind of, that if the suspension is held up to be the full 7, or even if it's dropped to 3 or 4 games, that's the equivalent of missing an entire series when you got 3 against the White Sox and 3 against the Mets coming up. So you'd miss the Chicago series, and then he would miss in the 6 games. He would miss the rest of the games leading up to the All-Star break, and then have one more coming out of it as well. But if it's 3 or 4, that's the entire White Sox series followed by the opener of the Mets series, and I think that it would be a huge loss for the offense, especially with the fire that he brings to the team, like you were mentioning, and it just puts that much more pressure on the pitching staff, and a depleted pitching staff at that, to keep the score low for the opponent, no matter if it's the White Sox or the Mets down the stretch before the break. Because without Willson Contreras, you're definitely losing some of the power that the offense brings. And then just generally about the Red Sox and how the rest of the season is going to go, what worries me about making a decision either way is that if you do make the move for a big star or a big deadline acquisition, how does that set you up down the road is definitely a question. And the the imminent 2027 lockout also brings another wrinkle into this as well. But also, I think that consistency has been a major issue for the Red Sox the entire season as well. And I think that some of these recent series give you magnifying glass into that, looking at losing a series to the Rockies and losing a series to the Nationals. I know is a little bit different because they have a top offense, but also one of the worst um, bullpens in the league. And then you look at the opposite of that and sweeping the Yankees. And then luckily you were able to take advantage of the Angels and get that sweep as they sit currently at the bottom of the American League. But it was nice to see some of the ways that the Red Sox won these games. Getting sack flies and playing more fundamental baseball has shown up a lot more recently, which has been a benefit to them. But I guess what I'm saying is that we've seen two different versions of the Red Sox at many points throughout this season, and are we gonna get to see a consistent version of the Sox after the All Star break? I don't know, but they're gonna have less time to move with only 68 games in the second half of the season with the way the schedule is set up now.
And Tony Matt has also said that they're playing more fundamental baseball too, with some of these guys that are coming up from the minor leagues, like Chang, who's kind of subbing in for Marcelo Meyer. We have Romy Gonzalez coming back, and he's kind
Ziegler's
of
been great in the time that he's been up here as well.
oh yeah, it's been great. But Romy's just a natural. But I guess what I was gonna say is you're seeing guys who are not trying to hit the ball out of the yard. They're getting the sack fly, or they're getting the double, or in some cases you're starting to see some guys hit some more home runs, like Durbin and Duran and Contreras. Sure, those guys are doing better at driving the ball, but some of these other guys are getting on base so that they can drive them in. And so that's something that wasn't happening at the beginning of the season. We were playing drive the ball 400 feet or strike out, like Rafaela likes to do. So, it's one of these situations where I look at it and I say they're starting to play more fundamentally sound baseball. Why not, just keep doing that? Because regardless of who you have, you're going to win more games that way. When it comes down to it, there's a runner on third base and one out or less. Why not just hit it to the outfielder deep enough to where you can get the runner in to tie the game up?
Even using the opposite field more. Like when Trevor Story is going well when he's healthy, the big talk is that he's able to shoot the ball to right field, and then he runs into the home run every once in a while, and his power strokes usually come in bunches as well. But without Trevor Story in the infield for an extended period of time, we've seen guys like Anthony Sealer and Sung Chae Chang, like you were just mentioning, not overthink it, come into the box with a plan, and they've been executing that well up to this point. We saw Sung Chae Chang bunt for a single in this series, using the shift to his advantage, and Anthony Siegler has also had some good extra base hits in his recent stretches. He's also been nice to kind of get the offense going out of the leadoff spot. Last night specifically, Masataka Yoshida had 3 hits, and his ability to not play every day, but when he's in the lineup, be ready to hit is something that has been a major positive for the Sox.
Yeah, I also think that they have a log jam there where Yoshida can't play every day. And then defensively, you don't want him out there every day. So, he's got to be that DH. But here's the thing is they play DH by committee. And I am one of those guys who just likes to have that David Ortiz or just another guy who's just a professional hitter, a Schwarber,
JD Martinez.
Yeah, exactly. JD Martinez, for example. Although I love using the Ortiz example because that's who I grew up with, but with watching. But yeah, JD Martinez is another example of that. Schwarber, like anybody who can whose job is just to drive the ball
and
and be a
rightfully.
professional hitter, you know? Exactly.
Mm.
And one thing I really wanted to discuss with you, Joey, before, we kind of move on to other things, is kind of the snubbing, if you will, of Contreras and Gray. Do you look at those as snubs?
Oh, absolutely. I think especially Sonny Gray. But I was hoping we'd get more news on Willson Contreras too, especially after Vladimir Guerrero Jr. elected to opt out of the All Star game, which slid Nick Kurtz from the A's up to that starting spot, which left a reserve spot open as well. I'm not sure if we have an official verdict on that at the moment, on whether or not someone was moving into a reserve role. But just looking at Sonny Gray, he's been so big for the Red Sox up to this point. And leading into the season, we thought the guy that when we needed a win, Garrett Crochet was going to be that guy. But this year, it's been Sonny Gray. So far, looking at some of just the basic stats, he's got a 10-1 record, which is tied for second in the American League, a 2.61 ERA, 82 strikeouts. So I know that win-loss records isn't a huge thing for a lot of stat heads in Major League Baseball, but 10-1 I think is just so staggering that you have to give him credit for it where it's due.
Especially on a team that couldn't score for the first 2 months of the year. Like, are you kidding me? Like on the worst offense in Major League Baseball, and you still have a 10-1 record. It's like Nolan Ryan stats up here, or Justin Verlander in his prime. Like what are we doing here? Like fans, are you okay? Like, are you actually okay? Because the way I look at this, Sonny Gray and Willson Contreras are both well deserving players here, and I think a big part of it is because they weren't very like the team as a whole hasn't been very good this year, and so people haven't been paying attention to it. But just
Absolutely, that does play a
look at
role
the
for sure.
stats. But look at the like when you're voting, there's these things called numbers. Look at them, like Guerrero's numbers versus Contreras' numbers. Guerrero
Yeah,
can't even hit off of a tee right now, and Contreras has two or three times more home runs than Guerrero right now. I can count how many home runs Guerrero has on my fingers. Like, but like, are you serious? Like, I know the name and the brand. Like, that's a huge part of it too. Like, oh yeah, I want Vlad because he's representing this community or whatever. But
and his father also too. Yeah,
yeah, and my dad was a good hitter too. But
there's
you
a name
know,
aspect to it for sure. But I mean, he's a great player. There's no,
he is, but
um,
Contreras has been miles better. It's
yeah,
not
I
even
think
a
you're
little
right.
bit better. Usually
I
it's
think
like by a couple of numbers or so. But he's got like you could come up with five stats that Willson Contreras has really outplayed him in. And I'd say the same about Sonny Gray for half of the pitchers that probably got in.
Yeah, I think it's harder to compare pitchers than it is to compare hitters because obviously not everyone is facing the same stretch of teams throughout a certain point of the season. But I think that in comparing Guerrero and Contreras, um, they're not that far away from each other in terms of teams. Like I just mentioned, they're the AL East standings are pretty congested once you get to 3 through 5, and the Rays and Yankees are pretty solidified at the top of the division. And I think I misspoke earlier, and I said that the Orioles were in third place, but as it stands now, it's the Blue Jays in third place. And more to my point, Contreras' Red Sox and Guerrero's Blue Jays are only a game apart from each other. The Sox 12.5 back and the Blue Jays 11.5 back up to this point in the season. And I think that you're right in saying that Contreras has been a much more valuable player to the Red Sox than Guerrero has been to the Blue Jays up to this point. But I think what plays a big role into it is how much does that really matter when the team is 8 games below 500. And if they were at the 500 mark and battling for a wild card spot, I think there's no question that Contreras is in unanimously.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm going to say to this is they kind of got going a little too late, in my opinion, where, like the All-Star voting has already closed, but Contreras just continues to get better, and, performance-wise, and you said he's homered in back-to-back games, and I saw it too when I was doing the agenda, but when a guy is hitting like that, I want him to be in the lineup. And especially if you're going to decline the All-Star game, why do I want you to be the starting first baseman if you're not even going to go?
Yeah,
in Guerrero's
that's a very fair point. But I think this could benefit Sonny Gray in a sense when looking at Ranger Suárez now with the injury last night. I don't foresee Suárez pitching until after the All-Star break now. He's definitely not going to get an inning in the All-Star game anymore. So maybe that inning ends up going to Sonny Gray if Chad Tracy decides that he wants to let his guys throw. Usually it's up to the manager as a discussion between the manager and the player on whether or not they're going to throw an inning in the All-Star game. But it'd be nice to see Gray get the recognition in some form for the great season that he's had. And looking at Gray and Contreras as two all-star snubs, they're also guys who could be playing a final stretch of games with the Red Sox because I think that they're two of the more likely trade pieces if the Sox decide to go in a selling direction.
I agree with you, but you're playing the fiddle a little bit too early on the Titanic, Joey. You're playing the fiddle a little bit early for me. But
I'm not saying I want them to go. I would rather them stay because I think they can be a big help to possibly getting into that playoff push. But I've never thought that 6 games leading into the All-Star break could mean as much as they do for the direction that this team could go than I do this year for the Red Sox.
It's actually the weirdest stretch of games I've ever seen in my 20 plus years of existence, Joey. I'll tell you this. I've seen 2012 where they were completely out of it. I've seen years that they were great in the first half and atrocious, especially under Hein Bloom, in the second half, where those younger teams weren't added to and they didn't know how to play, they didn't know how to hit enough to support the pitchers, and the pitchers got worn out, and so on and so forth. We've heard this story before, but I do think that they're at the point right now. If this is the version of the Red Sox that we're gonna see, why wouldn't you add an extra bullpen arm? Because Slayton and Weiser are like the two wild cards. Why don't you just add one more reliever and get a batter at this point? If you think that you're in it, because let's say they win all 6 of those games, to your point, they're only 2 games out of 500. So, and the third wildcard team right now is a team that is 500 in the Texas Rangers. So the competition isn't that good. And if you play better in the second half, which I believe that they will because they either have a really slow start and a great second half, or they have a really great first half and then the second half is awful. Based on what I've seen from Professor ChatGPT, who's giving me the algorithms of the y-intercept, if you will, or the slope, uh, it's like I can pick on it a little more if I'd like to, but to my point, you know, I feel like it is a team that is trending upwards, and I thought that they were really gonna like lose like 10 in a row to end that first half, and they would just sell. And now all of a sudden you've won 8 of your last 10, and your last 20 games you have a winning record. And it's like, oh, they're definitely fighting to not get traded. You know what I mean? They're definitely fighting to keep their jobs.
Yeah, for
So,
sure. I think that there's also, I was just taking a look at the schedule as well. There's going to be a ton of movement in the American League East coming out of the All-Star break, because just looking at it from a Red Sox perspective, after the 5-day break of the All-Star break, they they have a series against the Rays, followed by the Orioles, and followed by the Blue Jays. So that's 3 straight series against the American League East. So you're really going to know whether they're firmly in the basement of the American League East by the time those 3 series are over, or did they make a move and they're now in that third place range? We'll find out. But if they get to that third place range, that means that they've also made a move towards the wild card spot as well. But it'll be an interesting 6-game stretch going into the break, and then a very interesting 3 series uh, stretch as well coming out of the break. But let's move on now to the NHL update of the episode. Kyla, I'll let you take the lead on this, but we'll get it started taking a look at the Bruins' most recent
Corpusalo. Sorry.
Bruins' most recent trade to move up of Jonas Corpusalo.
Yeah, hey, I like the Corpusalo trade, as I was alluding to. I got a little eager there, a little bit of a false start on the offense. I'll take the 5 yard penalty there, but I like this move for the Bruins because Joey, you and I have been talking about this for months. We need to move off of Corpusalo so that we can kind of bring up DiPietro, who I thought was going to be the next edition of Bussy um, if they didn't make this move. So, and now that they've drafted 700 goalies or signed 700 goalies, they've acquired 700 goalies over the course of the offseason. I'm glad to have um, that cap space, which is almost $4 million, and also just have that opportunity for Di Pietro. And I think that you saw them make more moves because of it, and you're seeing them take more chances. I actually like a lot of what Don Sweeney's done so far. I know most Bruins fans are going to say, "Oh, they're horrible. Bring out the duck boats." Da, 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 da. Don Sweeney, but he's bringing them back to the playoffs again, while being resourceful with what cap space he does have. So I think that is a smart move, and I'll let you get some points in, Joey. But obviously, we knew that Swayman was going to be the one, and I really like the move for their number 2 because I think that he is a guy in DiPietro who's been who's proven at the AHL level that he should at least have a shot at the NHL.
Yeah, just looking at some of the regular season stats for DiPietro, he played in uh, 45 games this year with a 34-8-1 record. Um, with a 930 save percentage, his best save percentage since the 22-23 season. Um, the record doesn't look as great in the postseason. Providence only went 1-3 in that postseason, but I think that every season in the AHL for DiPietro, his save percentage has been above 500, I should say. Yeah, sorry, that was another mistake. Above 900, which is a big threshold for goalies, because if you're below 900, that usually means you're struggling pretty decently. So he's at least hit that threshold, and then the 930 and the 34 wins just shows statistically that he can get it done, but will it translate to the NHL level is to be determined, but I'm excited that we're getting to see this in a Bruins jersey rather than missing out on him like they did now Stanley Cup champion Brandon Bussey.
See, I think they have the ability to develop guys who are ready. I think they have a hard time identifying who's ready and who they can really develop, if I'm being honest. And I think they're finally figuring that out. Like you've seen Sweeney move on from Lysell um, and other guys as well. And I think Gasso is another one. Um, yeah, he didn't get much in those trades, but he's identifying who he can work with. He's starting to anyway. Now, would I like him to trade Mason Lohrei this offseason for a top four defenseman, which I think they still need a top four guy? Absolutely. I would 100% take a trade, with that, and but I also think that spending recklessly, like on a Darnell Nurse, for example, isn't necessarily great either because he kind of regressed badly this past year, and you'd be stuck with $9.5 million in salary cap if it didn't work out. So that's a huge risk for a young team to make. But I'm saying, like, if you can get a top four guy um, like a Truba or a Carlson, the veteran guy who can still get it done. Although Carlson just signed, and we'll talk about that.
We'll get to Carlson
But
shortly.
my favorite non-target of the year. I like to talk about Carlson every podcast episode, but it's one of those things for me where it's like, I feel like Sweeney is doing the best with what he has, and he is actually doing a better job of identifying, okay, these are the guys that we want to really build around in Coos and Fraser Minton, and and knowing, okay, Pasternak's going to be the big guy. We got our top six guy to kind of round out our top six. I really like their four lines, if I'm being honest. And I think they're really one defenseman away from competing, like being a team that goes into the second or even third round. I don't think they win the whole thing because you have Carolina and Florida, who are the Los Angeles Dodgers of hockey, who are absolutely just getting every player and their brother, it seems like, literally and figuratively. But yeah, I mean, I think that division's going to be a rough division too, though. That's the hard part about this is a lot of your divisional opponents got better. You saw Florida definitely got better. You saw Ottawa replaced their captain with a younger guy who might want to stay longer. You have the Red Wings who are just the Red Wings. And then, Buffalo has some young players, and Toronto definitely got better. They made a few moves, and Tampa replaced their defenseman who Toronto signed. So, it's like you're seeing a lot of these divisional teams get better. And I am liking the moves that Sweeney's making. I think he needed to make those moves. But I'm also worried about what your competition's going to look like this season. And I'm not sure you push all of the cards in. Although I would still trade Mason Lohrei, and I'll make my opinion clear on that.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think that the Atlantic continues to get better, especially after the Kachuk move. And I don't think that Florida is going to have as big of a down year as they did, and Carolina is going to be the defending Stanley Cup champions. So, rather, that's not, of course, Carolina's not in the Atlantic Division, but just taking a look at what the top of the Eastern Conference is going to look like. But I don't think that a lot of Bruins fans really expected Sturm to take this roster to the playoffs in his first year. So there are ways that they can continue to build. Do they get past the first round? They're continuing to build on that. We'll see if that happens. But then you look at the trade of Corpusalo, they get Kalle Vassanainen in the deal, who's doesn't have a ton of stats at the AHL level with the Hartford Wolfpack last year, but he's a 6'3" forward with some size, so definitely some intangibles that the Bruins think they can work on. But we'll move on to another move from Boston on July 1st. They signed Connor Clifton back to the Bruins from Pittsburgh on a 2-year deal.
I like that move. I okay. He kind of rounds out your top six, if you will. Like he's one of those guys that may not play. Like he's either going to be the sixth defenseman or the odd man out, or as they say, 6'7". Okay, whatever. But he's going to be that guy that kind of doesn't get a whole lot of playing time, but I think fits the program well. He fits the team well. I mean, and I think as a veteran guy, like you're gonna want that. He gives you a little physicality there. Um, some people say that he's horrible. I don't think he was terrible in Boston, and I actually think he would kind of round things out nicely. Um, some fans just want six Zdeno Charas out there. You're not going to get that. But I think what you see in Clifton, too, is that he actually wants to be here. He came back in the off seasons that he wasn't here. So he wanted to be here. And that also speaks volumes too, and how good the Bruins actually are to people that have been in the organization. And I actually did want to point that out. It's something that they do very well. As I'm often very critical of our Boston sports teams. But I think that it's a good bottom move. And I also think that the Borgen move is also a decent move as well. I think it moves the needle. I look at the Clifton deal as kind of your replacement to Andrew Peak, and I'm like, thank goodness, because I can't say it any better other than Andrew Peak has reached his peak. I feel like Clifton at least gives you a little bit more effort and a little more physicality.
Yeah, for sure. I think Connor Clifton is kind of that grinding, gritty defenseman that every team needs. His stats aren't going to jump up the page, but he does things that don't show up on the stat sheet. And just looking at some of those stats that he did have in his stretch with the Bruins from 2018-19 to 22-23, he appeared in 232 regular season games in which he recorded 43 total points, and he was part of the Stanley Cup runner-up roster in 2019. So he's seen some success as a part of the Bruins and is looking to help build on what Sturm and company did a season ago. As you briefly mentioned, Kyler, the last Bruins move we will discuss is the trade for Will Borgen, where the Bruins sent a 2027 second round pick and a 2028 third round pick to acquire defenseman Will Borgen from New York.
Yeah, I think this is kind of an underrated move. And I think a lot of fans are really picking on this move. But he's not John Carlson, who I obviously like to bring in, or Truba, somebody with experience. But he is affordable, That's the thing about Clifton too that I forgot to mention is Clifton is on a less than $3 million deal per year, so it's affordable. You know what I mean? So you're getting these two guys, getting a guy who's about who's a little less than he's 2.75 million per year, and then you got Borgen who's about four and a half million or so per year. And I think you had to make these moves, Joey. I was talking for the last 3 or 4 months now. I've been talking about how they needed to get defensemen, how they needed to get a top six forward, and they've done that. They've done what we've asked, Joey. Where we asked them to get rid of Corpusalo. We asked them to get a top six guy, and they got that. And we also asked them to get some defensemen, and they've re-signed some guys I would rather not see, but they've also added two guys that I think will bring more depth and more physicality to the defense, which is something you need. I like the idea of having two really physical guys in Zadorov and Clifton in the lineup. I think that you have the big Russian who's physical, and then you have Clifton who will definitely cover the guy in front of the net. So when you almost blow another 2-0 lead, you can have a guy who will at least get to the front of the net and stop it before it happens. I think he's that type of guy. To what you were saying, the intangibles, and you don't always need the guy who can skate. We've seen that with guys like Grzelcyk and Carlo, where they're talented but they're just not physical. And I like how Sweeney realizes he needs to add more physicality to his teams. As much as he's had some really skilled teams, he hasn't always had the most physical group out there. So having a mix of skill and speed with physicality is huge.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to get your thoughts on Darnell Nurse as the last little bit of hockey here, because there's a connection to the Bruins as well. There was a report that they had a deal in place, but a Bruins player invoked their no trade clause, and the player that was reported to have invoked that was fellow defenseman Nikita Zadorov, who you just mentioned in that thought with Connor Clifton.
See, I actually thank Zadorov on that one. At first, I liked the idea of the trade, but then I researched it, right? I looked at a couple articles about what hockey writers were saying, and I looked at his numbers for the money that he is putting up. His numbers were atrocious. He really regressed. Now, on a team that doesn't have as much skill, like Wayne Gretzky Jr. and company, Connor McDavid and Draisaitl and whatever, all those guys are really talented over there. But the thing is, Nurse would probably help in like the playoffs, like where you would have like a veteran guy. But I like the physicality of Nikita Zadorov. I know you're going to tell, there's other people who would agree with me. There's other people who would disagree with me. But I really like the physicality of Zadorov and how he's the one guy in the playoffs that I was like, okay, him and McAvoy, and okay, Lindholm too. So 3 defensemen that I like out of a total of 6, if we do the math. So 50-50, not great odds. We got to do something. But for $9.5 million on Darnell Nurse, who's regressing, I'm not sure I want to bring in all $9.5 million when San Jose took on all of that money. There was no retention in that deal. See, if there was retention in the Bruins deal, I'd be like, okay, like I would understand that. But you're taking on almost $10 million for a guy who might not be worth that anymore.
Yeah, and I think that I think that they made the right moves, not trying to get too expensive, but also trying to improve on the team. And to finish it out, let's. Kyler, I know you had some final thoughts on the Jaylen Brown trade. I'll open it up with a statement from Brad Stevens from the press conference that happened earlier this afternoon alongside Bill Chisholm, and then I'll let you kind of guide the conversation in whatever way you see fit. But Brad Stevens, in the official news release related to this press conference, said, quote, Jaylen Brown will rightfully go down as one of the defining players of this era. Like the best Celtics before him, he is a terrific player and has also had a huge impact off the court. On a personal level, I am thankful to have had a front row seat to the first 10 years of his illustrious career. I could go on, but a few sentences, paragraphs, or even chapters wouldn't do it justice. His legacy as a Celtic is forever etched in stone.
Absolutely. I think seven will be up in the Raptors. I agree with Brad on that one. I think he's right that Jaylen Brown will always be remembered in Boston. He brought them to two NBA finals with Tatum, and he was a homegrown Celtic. He spent his first 9 years in green. He kind of bled green, if I'm being honest. He played physically tough and, really gave you some old school mid-range and drive to the basketball at times with a little bit of three-point punch and great defense. But kind of my thoughts, Joey. I kind of asked you for this one, so I'll give you the best kind of thoughts that I can on this, and it's simple. For me, this kind of had to happen. I hate the trade as a fan. I dislike it. I got a little angry at first, or a little sad, like it was like I was going to the end of an era. It's like graduating from high school or college and not knowing what to do. I felt a little lost for a second. I felt a little nostalgic for a second. But when it comes down to it, I understand that they need to change the chemistry in the locker room. They um, they need to they need to kind of take action because the last couple of years have been a disappointment. Um, and I look at this and say, okay, I think Paul George brings a certain level of professionalism to this, and you can even look back many years and how Bird's teams look different throughout the years. He had Cedric Maxwell when he first came into the league, kind of like how Tatum had Brown, and they had the same knee injuries, if you will, the meniscus issue. And you know what they traded Maxwell for? They traded him for Bill Walton, who ended up being a huge six man for them and got them an NBA championship that year. Um, so I look at it as a big swing. I look at it as a veteran deal. Would I have liked somebody younger, like a Giannis, maybe? Maybe you add a couple bench play. The reason why I was more so upset about the Jaylen Brown trade was that they wouldn't add a couple of their bench guys in to just go out and get Giannis, because I think that would be a bigger duo. But how would that actually help the locker room when you'd have two of the top 10 players or top five even thinking that they're the big dog? You know what I mean? Like Giannis and Lillard didn't work out. Neither did Gordon Hayward, Kyrie Irving, and company work out. When we thought they were the best team in the NBA, on paper they were, but chemistry is a huge thing, and with the Philly thing, I don't think Jaylen Brown will back down to Joel Embiid. I think there will be a power struggle there. And seeing that Jaylen Brown jersey does make me want to puke. He doesn't look good in blue. But it's one of those things where I look at it and say, this isn't just this isn't really the end of a winning era. This is the end of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum together, sure, but it opens up his window again because in 2 years you'll be able to acquire a younger guy who you can put with Tatum to win a couple titles. And I think Tatum will enjoy playing with Paul George. I think Paul George is a veteran guy who would do anything to win that ring because that's the only thing he hasn't done yet is win that ring. He's played really well throughout the course of his career. A lot of people in Boston are being a little harsh on him. He's still got a little left in the tank. And, you know, this trade isn't my favorite. I am angry as a fan, but I can understand it from a business or operational standpoint.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is business now, and I'll add on just to finish it out. I think that this really wasn't Brad Stevens' decision all by himself. I think that some of this had to come up from ownership, Bill Chisholm, and the rest of the Sixth Street private equity that now owns the Celtics, and having private equity firms is a way that has ruined sports in a way just by making different money moves become such a huge part of it. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, and I have a quote from Stevens to go along with it, courtesy that was pulled from uh, the Clutch Mode pod, a fellow pod of the Boston Sports Zone network. When Stevens was asked about Tatum's input, he said, none. I don't ask other guys about other guys. I don't want to put them in that position. And I do think that that is true. As much as we might want to say that Tatum didn't like the way that um, Jaylen Brown kind of stepped into that number one role without him, I think that if they were to have made it past the 76ers in the first round and competed deeper for a title, this wouldn't be much more of a conversation. I think that they could have still done it together as a duo, but I think that this opens up Jason Tatum to be the absolute number one option rather than a 1A, 1B, because we're getting Paul George on the older side of his career, but he still can get it done for sure. And like you said, we still have picks and such to use later on down the road if they want to make another move, even if that be later on this upcoming season. But this doesn't this doesn't change my ideology that this doesn't make the Celtics a bad team, and it doesn't make uh, Brad Stevens a bad general manager. It just makes the Celtics a little bit worse than they were for sure. But they're not inherently a bad. I still see them competing up at the top of the Eastern Conference, but they're gonna probably be in that second tier, below Philadelphia and the New York Knicks, and I think that's a lot of what has turned people away from the trade is how much better you made Philadelphia throughout the next decade plus of the NBA with giving them Jaylen Brown. But it'll definitely be fun to see how this season plays out both in Philadelphia and in Boston, and those games between Philadelphia and Boston are for sure going to be some interesting ones heading into this season. That's going to do it for this edition of the Titletown Rundown here on Boston Sports Zone. Once again, you can follow us on X at Titletown Pod and on Instagram and TikTok at Titletown.rundown. All of our episodes and future episodes will be on the Boston Sports Zone YouTube channel, which you can find at sportszone_BOS or by searching Boston Sports Zone in your search bar on YouTube. Once again, that's going to do it for us here this evening. He is Kyler Quelch. I am Joey Matroni. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your night.